You are facing a dilemma. You want to raise your child to be bilingual or trilingual, but you are debating whether to speak to them in the official version of your target language, aka the lingua franca, or the local dialect that's such a big part of your identity. How should you choose? That's the dilemma I faced 5 years ago. By the end of this video, you will know the 3 questions you need to ask yourself to make the right decision and avoid the regret that I have experienced. So just a quick background to those of you who don't know me. I'm a UK-based mom actively raising my 2 children to be trilingual in Mandarin, Russian and English. The lingua franca versus dialect debate is super close to my heart as my husband and I have faced this exact dilemma ourselves. One of my YouTube viewers recently mentioned in the comment section that he is sad to see so many overseas Chinese parents talking to their kids in Mandarin in favor of their local dialect. And I know this debate isn't only relevant to people of Chinese descent, as many major nations around the world also have an official language, the lingua franca, that coexists alongside local dialect. Hindi in India or Spanish in Spain are just some examples. In this video, I'll talk you through the 3 main questions that you must ask yourself, which will help guide you towards the right decision for you and your family. You'll understand what the main pros and cons are with each decision and how you should weigh them up. I'll also share with you my own experience and tell you if I have any regrets about our decision. Why listen to another stranger on the internet? Well, I've been through this dilemma myself as a mum raising 2 trilingual children. I have a degree from Cambridge University and I am a qualified translator and language instructor. I'm also an associate member of the Chartered Institute of Linguists in the UK. In short, I'm absolutely passionate about empowering parents to raise multilingual kids. After watching this video, I encourage you to download my free family language planner, which will help you formulate a plan for your family. So without further ado, let's get started. What's the first question that you need to ask yourself when trying to figure out whether to speak to your child in the lingua franca or your local dialect? Let me tell you a story. Back when we used to live in London, I met multilingual families like on a daily basis. In fact, I would even say that we knew more bilingual or multilingual families than families that only spoke English back then. Where we used to live, there was a high concentration of people from Western Europe, so I was very familiar with the sounds of Spanish or French, for instance. But one day, in our local playground, I saw a European-looking dad speaking to a little girl in a language I didn't recognize at all. Being the nosy person that I am, of course I had to approach him. When the subject of languages came up, he told me that he was from the Basque-speaking region of Spain and he only spoke to his daughter in Basque. But what really stuck with me was the words he used. He said in these exact words that he had a moral duty to pass on the Basque language to his daughter. A moral duty. And now let me tell you another story. Around the same time as this encounter, I also met another family at our local soft play centre. I got chatting with a mum who had twin girls. The mum told me that she's English, but she and her husband and children lived in Barcelona in Spain. I asked her, "Oh, do your little girls speak the local language then?" And here's what she said, pretty much in these exact words. "Yes, they do. It's a shame that it's Catalan, not Spanish though." To me, these stories encapsulate the essence of the first question that parents facing this dilemma must ask themselves. What are your values? Are you an idealist who believes in passing on the linguistic heritage and culture, like that Basque-speaking dad? Or are you a pragmatist like the English mum? Of course, we must bear in mind that there is a fundamental difference between these 2 people's situations. Basque-speaking dad feels this sense of moral duty and obligation because it's his language and culture. By contrast, for the English mum, she quite understandably thinks that Spanish is more useful than Catalan, hence her comment about it being a pity that her daughter is only learn to speak Catalan. She doesn't feel an emotional stake in preserving the Catalan language or any sort of attachment to the language or culture. So the question is this: what do you yourself value more as a person and as a parent? Passing on the heritage and culture of your forebears, or passing on a more useful language to your child? When I say useful, I mean purely in terms of numbers, okay? It is a fact that, for example, Mandarin is spoken by 1.3 billion people versus Cantonese, which is spoken only by 85 million people, which is still 8 times the size of Sweden, but hey, you get my point. Or take Spanish as an example. It's spoken by over 400 million people worldwide as a first language and a further 100 million as a second language. Compare this with Catalan, which only has about 8 million speakers worldwide. So it's not unreasonable to think that languages with a greater number of speakers are more useful on a practical level. And by extension, it's also not unreasonable to think that your child will gain more of a competitive advantage by knowing a more useful language. So leaving aside the whole heritage argument, some people would also argue that we have the moral duty to preserve linguistic diversity by keeping our dialects alive. According to UNESCO, and I quote, "Despite the immense value of languages, more than half of all languages are in danger of falling into disuse, with devastating impacts for the global linguistic diversity and the situation of language communities, particularly indigenous peoples." So, if you speak a dialect or language that's highly at risk, you may well feel very strongly about preserving this language for posterity. I think that's a really noble thing to do, I really do. There's a compelling case for the idea that a world with less linguistic diversity will be a more culturally impoverished one. At this point, you might be wondering, what did we decide to do? Well, that's what we're going to delve into right now. Husband and I are in every aspect of our lives pragmatic almost to a fault. So for us, we both decided to raise our kids to speak Mandarin instead of my native dialect, Cantonese. To give you some context, I was born in Shanghai, in China, and raised in Hong Kong before moving to the UK as a teenager. I consider Cantonese my mother tongue, and for the first 2 years of our first child's life, I did speak to him in Cantonese as it came more naturally to me. However, when he turned 2, we decided to introduce Mandarin to our language mix. Gradually, Cantonese fell by the wayside as we struggled to keep 4 languages going at the same time. So in the end, we only kept Russian, Mandarin, and English. Do I have any regrets about our decision? I'll tell you more about this later on in this video, but for now, let's get back to the key point. You need to ask yourself what your core value is, what matters to you more. It's almost like, that head and heart debate. Do you have a super strong emotional attachment to either language over the other? Asking this question will help clarify your thoughts and guide you towards the right decision. And when I say the right decision, I mean the right decision for you and your family, because I firmly 100% believe that there is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to multilingual parenting. Every family is different. Okay, now that we've asked ourselves this first fundamental question, let's move on to the next question. What's the next thing I need to consider when deciding between the lingua franca and my local dialect? First, let me tell you about my cousin and her family. My cousin was born and raised in Shanghai, China, and is fluent in Shanghainese and Mandarin, and English, and to an extent, I think German and Finnish as well. She and her German husband live in Germany, where their son was born. Like me, she faced the same dilemma when deciding between raising her son in Shanghainese versus Mandarin. And like me, she started off with Shanghainese as it came more naturally to her. And again, like me, she switched to Mandarin later on, as apparently everyone around her told her that it would be more useful. Well, selfishly, I'm glad that she did, because when our kids get together, they can now communicate in Mandarin, the only language they have in common. Also, let's not forget the fact that my cousin and I would also be unable to communicate with each other if we didn't both speak Mandarin, the official lingua franca of China. When my mum, my cousin and I get together, our conversations are always a chaotic mix of Cantonese, Shanghainese and Mandarin. But having Mandarin at least means we can actually have a conversation. Although, to be honest, we could probably get by speaking to each other in English, but, well, that would be a bit weird. Well, why did I tell you this story? Because I want you to ask yourself this second crucial question when choosing between the lingua franca and your dialect. What are your family's goals and needs? This will be a major determinant of which language you should choose. In our case, Mandarin allows our children to communicate with their extended family in China and their second cousin in Germany, which is important to us. Because both my parents are from mainland China, we actually don't have any relatives in Hong Kong. So for me, it's more important that they can communicate with their cousins and second cousins in China. But this can be different for your family. In many countries, younger people are more proficient in the lingua franca than older people. A case in point is my late grandmother. She would have been in her 90s now, where she's still alive, and she never learned to speak Mandarin in her lifetime. And because I don't speak her dialect, we could never really have a proper conversation. And I imagine this would be the case in many other countries too. So, if communicating with grandparents who don't necessarily speak the lingua franca is high on your family's priority list, raising your child to speak your dialect might be a necessary choice. So we now know the two key questions that you must ask. 1. What are your values? 2. What are your family's goals and needs? But there's one more question you need to ask yourself. Before we find out what that question is, let me tell you the regrets I have about our decision. Because yes, I do have some regrets about giving up Cantonese in favor of Mandarin. I remember a while back, I stumbled upon an old video of me playing with my son when he was still a toddler. Back then, I was still speaking to him in Cantonese. And in that video, he was playing with a ball, kicking around in a park on a beautiful spring day. And he said the word bobo with a big grin on his chubby face. And oh my gosh, I was hit with this tornado of feelings. It was so immense and poignant and bittersweet. It was almost like a visceral sense of loss. To me, this one word, bobo, uttered by my little baby boy at that moment in time just captures the essence of what we have lost by giving up on Cantonese. Part of me will always be a bit sad that my children can't speak my mother tongue. Also, I'll always be sad that there's this whole other dimension of my existence that's foreign to them. Language can be such a big part of your identity and history. So it is sad for me that my children will not get to know or understand that part of my past. Also, a part of me feels like I can't be 100% fully authentic in conveying my thoughts and feelings to them when I speak Mandarin, because there's just something about communicating in your own dialect that just feels more, natural. If you're someone from a country where speaking a lingua franca plus a local dialect is the norm, I think you know what I mean. The lingua franca somehow feels more functional, while the dialect just feels more connected to your emotions. Share in the comments below if you feel the same way. Having said all that, on the whole, I do not regret our decision. As I said earlier, we are very pragmatic, so for me to invest so much time and energy and effort into raising our kids to be trilingual, I just want to get maximum practical value from it. Also, in the case of Mandarin and Cantonese, it's just a lot harder to establish a reading and writing routine in Cantonese. I can spend an hour just explaining why that is, but I won't do that right now. In a nutshell, Cantonese only has dialect status and has no official corresponding written language. For my husband and me, reading and writing is really important, and it's just easier to do in Mandarin. Also, in terms of the parent and child bond, I can say, hands on heart, that this bond hasn't been weakened in any way by our communicating in Mandarin rather than Cantonese. My mum also raised me in her non-native language, and we are as close as any mother and daughter can be. But in view of the regrets I do have, the third question I want you to ask as part of your decision-making process is this. Can you do both? Yes, that's right. I want you to at least consider the possibility of raising your child to speak both the lingua franca and your dialect. In theory, there's no reason why you can't do that. We wanted to keep our number of languages to no more than 3, but there are certainly families out there successfully juggling 4 or even more languages. And if you are currently a bilingual family living abroad, say you and your partner are both from India and are living in an English-speaking country, raising your child to be bilingual in Hindi and English. Let's say you and your partner both speak Bengali. Maybe try incorporating Bengali into your family's language mix. It's definitely worth trying. If you're already doing something like this, please share in the comments below, as I would love to hear your experience. In our case, if I could turn back time, I think I would have tried holding on to Cantonese for at least 6 more months before giving up. This is a genuine regret. That's why I really encourage you to experiment and at least try keeping both the lingua franca and the dialect in your family. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't. Multilingual parenting is always a process of trial and error anyway, so I really do encourage you to try different things and see what works. Why not try the time and place strategy to separate your languages? I've made a video explaining how that works, so check it out. One last thing I want to add is that no matter which option you end up going for, be reassured that knowing the lingua franca can often help the child acquire the local dialect later and vice versa, as a lingua franca and the local dialect would often, although not always, share some similarities. And also, don't forget that learning any second language will make learning a third or fourth language easier in the future. Ultimately, my advice to other families out there is to do what's right for your family, to recognize what's important to you. What are your values? What are your goals? What truly matters to you and your family? As I promised at the beginning of my video, you can download a free family language planner that I created to help you kickstart your family's language journey. The link is in the description box below. I really think it can help you. And if you're in the early stages of the journey, watch this video where I share my top 5 tips for raising a bilingual baby, as the baby years are so important. You can also watch my video where I dissect what's worked and what hasn't worked for us while raising our kids to be trilingual. Thank you guys, and see you in my next video. Bye bye.